I came across these free pallets, so I thought, why not try making something? I decided I was going to make a tabletop for a standing desk. I'm not a woodworker, and I've never built any furniture before, let alone something out of pallet wood. First thing up is to take these pallets apart, which was insanely difficult. I needed to preserve as much wood as possible without splitting or destroying it. Within the first 10 seconds, it was clear that was almost next to impossible. Almost every piece either split, cracked, or was super curved, which made me seriously reconsider this idea. I was only through one of 5 pallets and started worrying I wouldn't have enough wood to make anything. The standing desk legs were already ordered and arriving in a few days, so at this point I'm committed. At this point, all the pallets were taken apart, and this is what I was left with. I had this pile of scrap, this pile of usable boards, and this pile of dimensional lumber. It was at this point I started to come to terms with how much more work this was going to take, and that I may have been way in over my head. Don't get me wrong, I was up for the challenge, but seeing what I was up against gave me almost no faith it would turn out how I envisioned. I brought the pallet wood back to my garage, which is where I'll be building the desk. I got started removing the nails in the center of each board. I left the nails at the end since I'll be cutting those off with a saw, to save time and also allowed me to clean up the edges that were split. I began cutting the ends off, which didn't take me too long. Once that was taken care of, I was able to start mapping out the actual tabletop. I decided to go with a tabletop size that was 4 feet by 2 feet. I luckily had just enough lumber to make it work, and I was pretty happy with the size. My plan was to take all this dimensional lumber and evenly spread it throughout the tabletop, as I'd be relying on it for strength. These wide planks would also get spread throughout, but since they were thinner and weaker, I didn't want to rely on them. I started by laying out 2 end boards to give me the depth of 2 feet. I then marked my max length of 4 feet by using these 2 boards temporarily. Now that I have the approximate size of the tabletop, I started placing boards one by one in the center until I had the entire desk mapped out. Anything sticking out beyond those boards or the tape measure that I placed there would get cut off since they marked the max length of 4 feet as I just mentioned. I went through each board to ensure I'd placed the best boards in the center. I tried my best to avoid any pieces that were still split, cracked, or warped by placing it at the end where it get cut off. Next up was to take each board and send it through the table saw to clean up one edge. Today's sponsor is Sengled, a global leader in smart lighting. The team sent me over 3 of their best-selling lights for me to review, so we'll start with the first one, which is the smart Bluetooth RGBW light bulbs. In just a few simple steps, you can have the smart bulbs seamlessly paired with Alexa or Google using the instant pairing technology. No need for complex configurations. Just screw in the bulb, power it on, and you're good to go. Each bulb is color changing, allowing you to smoothly transition to any of the 16 million color options for endless customization. The bulbs also are dimmable, giving you the option to control the intensity of brightness from as little as 5% all the way up to 100. Between the color and brightness, these smart Bluetooth light bulbs give you the ability to create dynamic and versatile scenes that can match any mood and occasion. Next up, we have the Sengled Wi-Fi outdoor string lights. Not only do these string lights have the same features as the light bulbs just shown, these lights are waterproof, shatterproof, and extreme weather resistant and durable, making them a perfect choice for your outdoor space. These lights are 48 feet in length, making them a great size for most areas that you'll want to cover. Both these and the smart light bulbs connect to your smart home device and are controllable through the app, which is super easy to set up and follow. Last, we have the Sengled Dusk to Dawn motion sensor light bulb. You can easily transform ordinary fixtures into motion activated lights. Motion activated lights enhance safety and convenience. If you get home late and these lights are placed near your driveway and doorways, they will illuminate and provide ample lighting for your surroundings. And since they are motion activated, you also won't have to fumble for switches or worry about obstacles. The photocell sensor helps save energy since the light won't turn on during the day, and when it does turn on at night, it stays illuminated for 90 seconds. This will help reduce your electrical bill. That's on top of the nearly 85% energy savings you'll experience by simply using this LED bulb instead of a traditional halogen fixture. You'll save money and it's better for the environment. And most importantly, it's built to last and withstand outdoor conditions including rain and winter weather, no matter what climate you live in. If you're interested in any of these lights, I left all 3 links in the description below. Thank you to Sengled for being today's sponsor. Now let's get back to the build. The side I was cutting would be the side I was using for the top of the table, so I needed to again check each board to ensure I was saving the best side. After sending each piece through the table saw and covering my entire garage in a thick layer of sawdust, you can now start to see the desk taking shape. Once the wood had a clean edge, I then had to send each board through the table saw again to cut each piece to the table's thickness. I decided that the desk would be 1.5 inches thick, so I set the guide on the saw to the right spot and once again got to cutting. I wanted the desk to actually be 1.25 inches thick, but since I could see into the future, I gave myself another 1/4 thickness as a safety net in the case I screwed something up later. I knew I still had to plane and sand this thing after all the cutting, so leaving myself some room isn't a bad option. After blanketing my entire garage in another layer of sawdust, I was finally finished the second round with the table saw. And there you have it. As you can tell, this thing is starting to look more like a tabletop and I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. The next major task at hand was to glue everything together. I moved it inside since it's winter where I live and preferred to have the glue dry indoors and not out in the cold. I luckily had these clamps, so this is what I'll be working with. I did pick up this wood glue, so I was ready to start. Each piece was set in a specific order, so I had to be careful not to mix anything up. I really didn't know what to expect for this part, but it was way harder than I thought. The glue started drying faster than I could apply it, so I ended up doing it in sections, clamping about 8 to 10 rows at a time. This entire process was more chaotic than it seems, since I was stressing over the glue drying too quick and the pieces not laying flat. This is where I realized I should have run each piece through the table saw a 3rd time, especially on the war pieces, but it was obviously way too late for that, so I moved on. I basically just had more to plane off when I got to that step, so I was thankful I left myself some wiggle room when cutting the thickness of each piece. I got the table all glued and clamped, so I left it overnight to dry. The next day I took it back outside and marked my lines at 4 feet so I could cut off the excess. As you can tell, there is quite the amount of planing to do as there are pieces laying proud all over. And once again, I got lucky that my dad had this old planer that looks like it was from the 90s. I've never used one before, but I got right to it. I started on the backside just to play it safe, and thank God I did because I had the gauge set deeper than I thought and took a nice chunk out, but after some more passes, I was able to hide it. I got the hang of it pretty quickly and got to work passing over it multiple times. And once again, covered the garage in sawdust. I finished the planing and this thing was looking like an actual table. If you can't tell by my voice, I was actually pretty shocked because honestly, I had little faith I'd get to this point after taking those pallets apart. Don't get me wrong, there was a lot of imperfect areas, but she's looking good. Next up was the sand. I started with an 80 grit because it was what I had on hand. If you can't tell already, I've been trying to spend little or no money on this thing with the exception of the standing desk legs. This is more so a practice project for me, so I don't want to pour too much money into it. I don't mind spending the time, but once I get better, I'll maybe start to spend more on them when needed. This corner got fucked when I was sanding, so I had to do a quick glue up. I put a scrap piece of wood on it and clamped it down. My dumbass didn't see what was coming, but when I went to take it off the next day, the block got glued to the tabletop. Luckily, I was able to pry it off with no damage. I got back to sanding, this time with 120 grit. I then switched to 150 grit and did it by hand instead of the power sander. Then I got a damp cloth and wiped down the entire table. This not only took away the dust, but also raised the grain so I could sand it one last time before staining. And this was a stain I chose, which I did pick up from Home Depot. I decided to go with a walnut since that was what I thought would look best. I was only applying one coat since I didn't want it to be too dark, but I did apply it quite heavy just to ensure the color soaked in. I applied it with a brush, then went back and wiped it off with a rag, repeating the same thing on the back. After leaving it to dry overnight, it was time to apply the varnish. I'm using a satin finish, which looks like a white transparent color, but dries clear. I ended up doing 3 coats, letting it dry overnight each time before reapplying. While the varnish was drying, I got started building the standing desk legs, which finally arrived. I'm not affiliated with this brand, but I found them on Amazon and they were pretty inexpensive. I left a link in the description in case you wanted to check them out. Now I swear I ordered just the legs, but for some reason it came with a melamine tabletop. Not sure why, but I'm not complaining. It was a pretty straightforward build. All I needed to do was attach the legs and feet with a few bolts and it was good to go. The next day I applied the third and final coat, making sure I got in all the exposed seams and holes. I brought it inside once it was dry and got started on the last and final task of this entire build, which was connecting the tabletop to the legs. Finally, I attached the control pad that controls the height, and we can officially call this thing complete. As you could probably see throughout the build and even now, there are quite a few areas with imperfections. During the build, I realized I wasn't going to get things to be perfect, so I decided that I'd unintentionally go for that rustic, industrial look. I may have just made that up, but I truthfully really like how it turned out. For my first time turning pallet wood into a piece of furniture, I'd say I was way outside my skill set and abilities, but I'm glad I saw it through and was able to actually make something. Despite it not being seamless and perfect, I think that's what gives it character and makes it a one-of-a-kind piece that I'm actually happy with. Unless that's just me reassuring myself it wasn't a total waste of time. Thanks for watching if you made it to the end, and hit subscribe if you like this type of content.